Here we go. All right. Welcome everyone. We're going to start with the land acknowledgement. So we begin by acknowledging that we're in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship, which Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy people first signed with the British Crown in 1726. And we also acknowledge that people of African descent have been in Nova Scotia for over 400 years. We honor and offer gratitude to those ancestors of African descent who came before us to this land. So welcome everyone. This presentation is on the new community-based learning and O2 policies and the resource documents as well. The presentation today, Kim Duncan and I won't be talking for an hour straight. We don't want to be reading policy off to you. What we're going to do is highlight some changes and provide opportunity for questions. We will also be, Kim will be sharing a link to a folder which will have all the resources in there as well. So if you haven't had a chance to review those documents previously, you will be able to at this point in time. And if you have any questions, seeing as how we're a really small group, you're more than welcome to either put them in the chat or you can raise your hand, and we're encouraging discussion. Today's about kind of getting some clarity around the policies and the documentation that's there, and we hope these have provided some more clarity compared to what the previous documents were that were a little dated by this point in time when we made the change. So I'm Jamie Mcdonald. I am a consultant here at the Department of Education and Early Childhood Education in the career pathways. And one of my main responsibilities is the Options and Opportunities program. So I'll be speaking from the O2 perspective today. And Kim?
Yeah, so Kim Duncan, and I'm on the Career Pathways team with Jamie, and my main role is to support cooperative education and other community-based learning initiatives. And so I will speak from the perspective of the new co-op policy and resource.
So I know we were going to speak a bit about the context of why these changes came about. So it wasn't just due to the age of them, but some other changes that occurred that brought them up. And I'll let Kim explain here, and then we'll go into the context there.
I tried to be funny, so I thought, how do you make a session about policy exciting? And, sometimes you hear the word policy, and you maybe start to maybe drift off and think about more rules and restrictions. But really, these are policies that are opening up opportunities and providing clarity, as Jamie mentioned. So they're super important, and I'm hoping very helpful to you in your plans for the next school year. Trying to add a little humor.
So, yes, the context of these, if you want to start with that, Kim,
I can start that. So just to give a little context, so I think it was 2018, and there was a review completed. It's sort of an audit on community-based learning, career pathways programming, and that included O2, co-op, skilled trades, tech ed, entrepreneurship, career development. And these are all areas that fall under the umbrella of the Career Pathways Division. And so the review included everything from surveys to focus groups, conversations with students, families, educators, community partners, just to find out what the impact of these programs were, their strengths, their challenges, etc. So the findings, for the most part, were really confirmation of success that comes from experiential learning, which isn't really surprising. And there was valuable feedback that informed some of the changes you'll hear about today. And so part of that was also curriculum renewal. So I know that that's on the horizon for high school courses, but some courses have been renewed, and that includes co-op and some community-based learning courses. And so the idea is that this new curriculum, along with ensuring that we are in line with the inclusive education policy, being culturally and linguistically responsive and supporting all learners, that's what kind of led to the changes in these policies, which were just released in May. And so that's what we're here to speak with you about. And Jamie, I'll let you take it away in regards to the O2.
Sure. And I mean, other extenuating circumstances, things like the change in the school start date made some requirements for policy being updated, and just increased clarity was one of the other pieces that we heard in a lot of those sessions and getting feedback from people. Um, the Options Opportunities Program, if you're not aware, is a 3-year high school program designed to help students develop skills and make connections to education and career pathways through experiential learning. The goal is to provide them with opportunities to um, figure out the path they want to go on, to develop the skills to make those transitions and have meaningful connections to the workforce, and educational pathways prior to leaving school, and ideally have a path kind of defined, but to have those skills in case things arise where they may need to shift and change and meet the realities of today's workforce. And Kim.
Yeah, so community-based learning, it's bringing learning and community together. CBL is integrated throughout O2, but it's not exclusive to O2. CBL happens at any and all grade levels. It's about going into the community or bringing community into the classroom. So co-op is a huge focus as a course, and it's O2 students are required to have 3 co-op credits, but any students, O2 or non-O2, can apply for and enroll in a co-op course. And CBL is field trips, job shadows. We think of Take Your Kid to Work Day. It's service-based learning or community projects would be some examples.
All right. So the O2 policy, again, as Kim had said, was released in May. Was a long process. We'd spent 2 years getting it ready to be released, and some of the key changes that exist now. It's always been a cohort with 20 that's been loosely applied. At this point, in order to exceed that, they need approval from their YPC. So for a school to exceed the 20 students coming into grade 10, permission needs to be granted from the YPC, and there should be a strong reason why that's occurring. Um, One of the things we heard in lots of conversations was only certain students were getting the information in certain schools, and it was not being provided to all grade 9 students, so access wasn't being provided equitably. So in the policy and in the resource document now, we mentioned that all grade 9s are to receive information about the program. So it's seen as an option for all our students to consider. The O2 lead now must teach either the Career Development 10 or Community-Based Learning 11. Um, that wasn't in writing anywhere previously in the policy. In a couple cases, there was an O2 lead who actually didn't teach any O2 students, which was a concern because the goal of that role is to build those relationships. And if they are never spending time with that person, with those students, then it's really hard to build a relationship. Um, FTE used to provide classes that are minimum 50% or 2 and capped at 25. That's for any additional classes outside of the mandatory ones, which would be CD10, CBL 11, and English or French language arts, which are cohorted at 100% O2 students. That hasn't changed in this policy. And one of the other things that changed in the policy previously that's not on the list there, is um, we streamlined the curriculum. As mentioned, we renewed the curriculum. Previously, they had CD10, um, CBL 10, Career Development 11, and Workplace Health and Safety 11. One of the things that we'd heard through our um, feedback sessions was with the increase in mandatory credits that had happened over the course of the last several years in school, that extra math, um, adding additional courses that were required there. All of a sudden, they couldn't make things work anymore. It was very difficult to keep students and meet all the graduation requirements and O2 requirements. So we removed a mandatory course to allow it to be a bit streamlined. Interview and application records of students who are not accepted have to be kept for a year. That was never in the policy previously, but this has come as part of feedback from insurance and privacy as well. Any records for students who are used for a decision on students have to be kept for at least a year, and students who are accepted, those records have to be kept for 6 years. So as mentioned, the certificate requirements slightly changed. We streamlined the courses to allow a little bit more flexibility, so students can take the courses required to pursue their pathways. They can get some experience and exposure. We'd heard having 3 courses, there was a bit of redundancy that was happening in some of the outcomes. So we streamlined the outcomes, we aligned them to allow it to be more meaningful for students at that point in time. Students are no longer required to be scheduled for all 3 years. That was um, a previous piece that was in policy, and it put an additional strain on the system when students had to be in a class. Um, so you're putting additional bodies in class who don't need that for graduation, or it's not a meaningful class to them. Um, Funding will be reviewed on an annual basis at the school level, so ensuring that people are actually abiding by the policy and adhering to how the FTE is supposed to be used, how O2 is supposed to be offered. That um, they're holding true to what's there, and then regions or the CSAP will work with schools to ensure all students have equitable access. That's a big piece that we are working towards. Um, Prior to this renewal has been something that's been a priority for us, and especially um, uh, recently with the inclusive ed policy and the new mandate, we're working to really ensure that's happening, and it's been reinforced in the O2 resource and the Cbl resource as well. We want to ensure that all students see themselves represented in these programs and have access to these programs.
Awesome. Thanks, Jamie. And feel free to pop some questions in chat or any questions that come up. All right, so the CBL policy. So I just want to mention that SIP, the Student Insurance Program, is really kind of what drives our policy in some ways. So the policies and resources that we have, we collaborated with SIP, and they are in place because, well, safety is paramount, and if policies aren't followed, not only is it a risk to students, but it can also negate the insurance and can mean no coverage is in place. So just something to note. So a few highlights of the changes in this policy. One is the age requirement. So a few years ago or so, with the change in the age for the start of school, this means that they were as young as 4 when they started, and when they got to high school, they're younger than 16. So in our old policy, students had to be 16 before they could do a placement. So now students can be 15 as long as they're in grade 11. And so if they're in grade 10, co-op really isn't an option, or typically an option in grade 10 anyway. They're young. So the idea is that by grade 11, they're in co-op and they are preparing, so they are workplace ready. So they can be, so they're 16 or they're 15 and in grade 11 for co-op and short-term placements, which are a max of 25 hours. And so job shadow is 13 years or older, and if not supervised by school staff or parent, then a risk assessment must be completed. And so to note, a new CBL risk assessment form has been created and is available. And that risk assessment is something you complete for job shadows, short-term placements, service learning, anytime a student is participating in independent learning activities. So it's about safety and making sure everyone is aware of the environment that the student will be in, and requires that parent signature. The intake process for co-op hasn't really changed. It's just clarified in the policy and the resource. And important to note that the process looks different than other courses. Students can't just enroll in co-op. The process involves application and interview. So the co-op teacher shouldn't be surprised to meet students for the first time on the first day of classes. The intake process is there to help ensure that students, their parents and their family, they're aware of the unique nature of the course, the independent learning that's required, the commitment, and it really is about helping to prepare those students. And so they want to ensure students are aware of all of this, and they're prepared and can be workplace ready. And co-op teachers are planning ahead, so they want to know what the student interests are, what kind of placements they're looking for. And that process is clarified in the resource, which we'll share with you after the policies. Just keeping in mind that the sound of an application and an interview process can sound daunting to anyone, especially a young person. So this should be done in a way that reduces or removes barriers. And so keeping in mind that students need to be supported through this, whether that's working with the school support workers or families, just to make sure that process is equitable and accessible. And interviews aren't really meant to be formal, but they're a chance for discussion, just meeting that student. And so that's part of the intake process, which is a mandatory process. And there has been a change in the number of hours required for co-op from 100 hours to 80 hours. And this has been in place already for the last few years. There was permission to put this into place before the actual release of the policy. 100 hours could sometimes present challenges where you throw in a couple of snow days, that can't go to co-op for some reason. So there wasn't a lot of leeway to fit that 100 hours in. So 80 is more doable and sometimes more appealing to employers. So it's 80 hours for a full credit, or it could be 40 hours for a half credit. And when we look at pre-placement, so co-op, there has to be ongoing learning and reflection. So the beginning of co-op is really the students are in class every day for about 4 to 6 weeks, and they start their placement after that, about once per week, and then they'll continue to meet together. So clarity is provided around these course requirements in addition to the placement. So students have to meet readiness criteria. And so that's everything from workplace etiquette to safety training. Sometimes students may have done a previous co-op and they just need a refresh. But the idea is that students should never be going directly to a work placement without that pre-placement instruction, whether that's the full, approximately 25 hours or whether it's a refresh. And they're preparing for a new placement. Not only is this about creating a resume or preparing for that, it's ensuring they understand safety and risk management specific to that placement or industry. There's a focus on goal setting and how they will continue to demonstrate that growth. And the co-op forms were updated. They were actually updated a few years ago with a renewed curriculum, and more changes were recently made, as recent as last month, to align with the inclusive ed policy. So we met with consultants in Mi'kmaq services, the African Canadian services, and newcomers, just to get perspective and review the forms to look for any barriers that they might see, to review for use of language. So most of the forms have been changed in some way. For example, using language that is inclusive on the community reference form. There is language there that refers to perhaps using a reference who is an elder or a knowledge holder. So that's just one example, but those co-op forms have been updated. They are available on the Moodle. They are soon going to be available on the curriculum website, so those will be updated in the coming days. And your Youth Pathways consultant can provide copies of these as well. And they'll provide a sample folder. And so usually as a co-op teacher, you would have an entire folder or file for that student with all of the forms, which are kept on file for 6 years. And those files, they should be accessible to your Youth Pathways consultant, to administration, and kept, as I say, in a place for 6 years. Okay, so then we look at site visits and check-ins. Site visits and check-ins are logged in one of those forms. So an 80-hour placement requires 4 contacts, with 2 being on site, not including the initial meeting to set the placement up. But it should also include, a good practice I find is, once you have a student placed, you might check in the day after just to see if things got off to a great start. And then you would have your 2 site visits and then 2 check-ins that could be whatever form of communication works for you and the employer, whether that's email or a phone call after that, after the student is on the placement. That was a lot. I'm going to skip down to the resources. So what we just provided is just some highlights of changes. We're not going through the entire policy for O2 and CBL, but it's the highlight of what has changed. And so along with those policies, new resources have been created. And so I'll let Jamie talk about the O2 resource.
Yeah. So we had a previous O2 resource for school, which I believe was last updated in 2013. So, which means it's probably worked on in 2011 and 12. So about a decade ago. And obviously things have shifted in that time. Um, so we chunked it up to really have some important key information in there that really supports the policy, um, where the policy is clearly defined with parameters. This provides some context to those and that additional information to clarify where necessary. Things like what's the goal of the program, right? What are the expectations? So that they should be engaging in a broad range of community-based learning experiences, um, really focused on the competencies and skills. Um, should support equity and reflect the diversity that exists within the school. Have responsive teaching, things like that, um, and connects back to the community-based learning policy, which governs a lot of what those community-based learning experiences would be. So we know our two students are on 3 co-op placements. We know that they go out on field trips, on job shadows, on all those opportunities. Um, those expectations of what they should be able to do by the end of high school, the active engagement in learning, be able to articulate a career and education plan, have some more increased awareness of their skills and knowledge, be able to transition to the next phase of where they're heading, awareness of what the labor market looks like, especially in Nova Scotia. It also in here has what we expect schools as an O2 school to do for students, what the classroom should look like, um, what what success and student engagement should look like. Section on digital portfolio, um, and one thing that we've heard, um, and I think has been received well by the people we've communicated with, is looking at what attributes and experiences will be valuable in a nurture teacher. Not an exhaustive list, and not a you have to check all these boxes or the teacher has to be exactly this. But some of the experiences and attributes that um, we found exist within successful O2 leads. Um, so having a list of those, and as well what some of the responsibilities for an O2 teacher are. Again, not an exhaustive list because that would make the document way too long, but some of the key elements that are there, um, which is a really valuable piece for administrators who may not be familiar with the O2 program. They're new to the school. Maybe they come from middle school. Um, they've come from other experiences. The first time as an administrator, it's a great chance to see kind of what they do beyond just teaching the classroom. Um, it's also great for writing some job ads if you're putting them out there for an O2 lead as well, and just and having discussions with those teachers about what some of their responsibilities may be before tackling this job. Gives them information about record management and the required documents. Um, Things like we mentioned in the past, the application and interview record, all their O2, all their co-op documentation, um, anything related to transition from or to the program. So students are transition out, um, or their acceptance letter would be there. Any risk assessment forms, things like that. It also has information about entering and exiting the program. That was something where it was a little gray before. Now it talks about how to set up the intake process to ensure a bit more equity. How that you should be working with all students in the school. Should reaching out to support staff as well. Whether that's our our Indigenous support staff, our African Nova Scotian support staff, our newcomer support staff as well. You know, to before, not as a reactive approach when people aren't sure, but early on engage them in the process. Having people who students can see themselves represented in the interview panel. So having maybe those support workers in there, so the student isn't looking at a panel of people who look nothing like them and have no shared experiences with them. Um, so working on those pieces there and exiting the program, that there it should be a process. It shouldn't be a kid has an issue and you're throwing the kid out of the program with no warning, no communication with the family. Um, that it should be progressive, and where a student is removed, uh, the O2 lead is responsible for informing the student and family in writing. So it's not just a telephone call. It should have it documented um, in that process as well. Um, and say from our perspective, um, with that record keeping, having documented notes on the interview process and why students may or may not be accepted is really important, because that's one of the number one calls we get is, why wasn't my kid accepted? I don't understand. And when people say, I don't know, they weren't a strong candidate, but they have nothing to kind of put there. They don't have any documentation. It makes the process a lot harder. Those that have documentation and they have notes, um, it's much easier in the process um, to move that along. So um, talk about the scheduling of students. Um, make reference again to that, those additional sections that use the FTE, that are beyond those mandatory courses, have to be minimum 50% O2 and can't exceed a cap of 25 students. There's no flex in that one there. It's 25 students. That's directly in the policy, and it's reinforced here as well. Um, and there's some good practice things there, like when possible, have students take co-op, two of their three co-ops in grade 11. So they get a real opportunity while they're considering their applications for the next year to try a couple things, and they're not backloading stuff to the second semester of grade 12. Um, COVID um, brought up a whole bunch of issues with that, when students were unable to really struggle because they still had two co-op credits or three co-op credits to complete in the second half of grade 12, and schools were in a concerning position because students couldn't go out at that point in time. So staggering them to ensure there's lots of time for it to happen, students can make informed choices before their last semester, because it's really hard to change what you've applied for and start to pursue a path when you make that decision second semester grade 12. So having one in grade 12 and two in grade 11 is, if it works, kind of best practice, but not leaving stuff till leaving as little as possible the second semester, because things do happen. Student may get sick, they may get injured. Um, a placement may be difficult to locate at that point in time, and we see this more infrequently, but it still happens where students are struggling to finish that last call placement. Becomes a very stressful experience for everyone involved. Those are the key kind of components. We do have links to documentation, including an interview record, the updated learning agreement, the updated application form, which, similar to Kim, we spoke with our Mi'kmaq education coordinators, our African Canadian Services branch, and our people responsible for newcomers. We streamlined the application to ensure that it's a little bit easier to navigate, and if that interview and conversation is happening post, we shouldn't just be a rehash of everything that's written in the application there. One of the other pieces that we gave on that application is a check to say, I need more information, right? So families and the student who require more information for they want to consider applying and clarity, can do that, pass that in, and the OT lead can follow up with them there, which makes the process a little bit easier than them not know who to reach out, because that sometimes happens with when dealing with grade 9 students, are unsure who to ask these questions to, or that's an extra barrier in the way and it just doesn't happen. But to be able to check that box off, bring that back, and then be able to bring that back to the school, and then be able to have a follow-up conversation. And they can even indicate on the form how they'd like that, whether it's an email, it's a phone call, it's a virtual session. So they can provide some follow-up information there as well, and they may complete it and still want some more information before they have their student apply. So in addition to that, we have a sample timeline as well of what the year could look like. So the document isn't that long. It's 12 pages, but there's really good information in there, and those documents are linked external to the resource, so that we're able to update them as necessary without having to change the whole resource. So that makes the process a little bit easier. And on the slide there's also a link to our O2 Moodle that has some resources for career development 10 and community-based learning 11, and also has links to the policy and things like that within there, and external links that would be beneficial for delivery of the program.
Great. So our other resource, which replaces the outdated one, is also linked here. So you can access any of these. I put a link in the chat that is a link to this presentation and any accompanying documents, including the policies and the resources. So they are there. So the new Cbl resource, just giving you a quick overview. It starts with, learning through the community is really what it is, and provides lots of examples. So I know that there's a large focus on co-op and high school. Cbl is for any grade level. So this section will refer to the many types of Cbl learning across grade levels. There's a chart that gives a snapshot, including grade levels, so examples of Cbl, grade levels, and just some considerations for those experiences. It's really important just to remember that you always follow your region or CSAP policies, and your youth pathways are consultants in every region and CSAP who support Cbl, co-op, O2, etc. And so their main role is high school related programming, but they're a great resource for questions about any Cbl experience. So there is a link in the resource to the YPC directory, if you don't know who they are, but I'm sure most do. There's a section on pre, during, and post experiences. So it's a chart that I think is helpful just to give recommendations on how to prepare students for Cbl experiences. So what kind of questions should your students ask? Talking about this before they go to a community experience. What things do you need to consider? What do you need to discuss with them before going on a certain field trip? There's ideas about how to help students make connections, what questions you could ask the host, the community host, before you go on a worksite tour, for example. So there's a great chart there. There's some information on reflective practice. So, as educators, you don't need me to explain the importance of reflection and making sure that those experiences are meaningful and always connected to curriculum. But there's some questions and prompts listed in the resource that you might find useful. And reflection doesn't have to be and shouldn't always be asking the student, of course, to write a 500-word essay on their experience. It comes in many forms through group discussion, video, photos, etc. But there's some tips and advice and suggestions in this about reflective practice, and lots of links to resources. Coordinating Cbl experiences, it looks different in every region and community with varying relationships developed, but there is an appendix with a list of partners that are common across the province of Nova Scotia. So every region will have a rapport or specific experiences, and then provincially we have some partnerships that may be useful to refer to in that appendix. Risk management, of course, is a large piece of this, and there is a link to CIP's website, which is where you would always refer for certain questions or a certificate of insurance. And again, asking or referring to CIP for unique experiences, and also your youth pathways consultant. And the resource is, it includes the policy, it includes the risk assessment form, this new community-based learning risk assessment form, the list of partnerships, and so on. So there's lots in that resource. I'm definitely not going to read through it, but these are this is kind of how it's organized, and I think there's some really great links and resources in there. And then there's a link here to the co-op Moodle, which has all of these same resources as well. I feel like we went through that, just kind of there's a lot of information there, and so this is really meant to be a highlight of some of the key changes and really just show you where to access all of this information. And so Jamie, I'm not sure, so we can have some discussion. I don't know if we need to record the discussion or the questions, but we can just get your thoughts on that.
I mean, any questions that you have, it may be if you don't mind asking them while they're recorded, that would be great. If you want us to stop the recording, we can do that to answer questions as well.
I have a question. I don't know. I don't mind if it's recorded. My question is, like, from your perspective, when do you think, I've had this question a couple of times, when do you think that Cbl 11 should be delivered? Do you think it should be, is it best suited for grade 10 second semester or grade 11 first semester?
I think it ideally works grade 10 second semester. It allows you to more seamlessly transition into co-op because they've completed all the heavy work of the pre-placement assessment, the pre-placement work, the workplace readiness. They still have to do a refresher, obviously, but by leaving this Cbl 11 till second semester, they'd have to go through the full gamut of the co-op pre-placement work. That would again, sometimes scheduling becomes a nightmare. I mean, if you have a group of kids that, in order to make things work, it becomes a challenge. It's possible to offer in grade 11. Definitely, I wouldn't do it beyond first semester. I think that's a gap there. And I know the question becomes, what about well, we don't want to lose them in a cohort class. Well, the reality is, funding has stayed the same, and you have the ability to offer another cohorted class for those kids that kind of meets their needs too, right? In grade 11, so that opportunity exists there, and I know that was sometimes the concern, but it works well to be able to do it in first and second semester. As long as CD10 is being done before, that's the ultimate piece, because some of the stuff really scaffolds well. And is designed for that. So trying to do them simultaneously, they haven't had any reflection time to kind of take the stuff deeper, right? So that's a concern there. But in theory, second semester grade 10 works, especially because there's more choice in grade 11, so fitting it in, if kids are taking different levels of math and different sciences and other electives, can become more of a challenge, right? Where grade 10, you have a little bit more limited selection of stuff to a degree, right? So it's usually a little bit easier to fit it in grade 10, where, especially if you're in a small school and that's the only time chemistry 11 is offered and a kid has to take that, or the only time, that level of math that they're interested in is offered, or whatever else the case may be, it's a one-off course, that becomes a real challenge. Not that those challenges can't exist in grade 10 too, but I think it's easier in grade 10 for sure.
I agree. I think so. I'm wondering, so if they were to offer it in first semester of grade 11, let's say, is it possible then that kind of impacts their co-op, right? Because they then couldn't start co-op until second semester of grade 11. Is that correct? Or could they go to both at the same time?
They could go to both at the same time. They'd just be working on more of the pre-placement stuff, so they wouldn't get kind of that they wouldn't have met the majority of the outcomes and just have to do the refresh, they'd have to do the whole gamut of stuff there, right? So then
Right.
maybe they may be looking at things that they're doubling up on, right? But they'd have to do them
Mhm.
as two separate courses, right? And especially if we wanted them to do two in grade 11, that would mean two of their four courses in first semester would be
Right.
CBL 11 and co-op, which again potentially limits what else they can take.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ideally, just like Jamie said, you want that CBL 11 in second semester of grade 10, if
Yeah.
you can, just because they do have to fit those 3 co-op credits in over grade 11 and 12.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you.
I also have a question, and I don't mind being recorded for this one too. So there was a mention a few times about engaging support workers for the intake, and I do appreciate that. I think that it's a need that we need to kind of like. The reality is like some of our marginalized students are not being placed in those programming. My question is like, how do we communicate that with the actual system, or is there a plan in place for when we engage the support workers? Is this the region's responsibility to kind of send out the message, or is that coming from the province down to the system? Because I think that all at EECD level, like the consultants for Mi'kmaq services, African Nova Scotian services, should be aware of this. So actually, when we work with our coordinators at the region level, that they are aware to engage those pieces, like their support workers, because I don't have a connection with those folks, but some other coordinators do, and it's that message again, that communication piece that I'm worried about, and I don't know if there's a plan in place to help in the background navigate these pieces.
So the processes are already started. That's a very good question, Stefan. Because yeah, having it in writing and having it in practice are two completely different things. So we have communicated with coordinators at schools. We've followed up with them. We let them know that, or coordinators at regions and CSAP, let them know that this is the expectation. We've also communicated with the youth pathways consultants that the expectation is they're going to work with the coordinators at regions to build relationships and connect their teachers with those support workers. We're as well having staff come and speak at the new teacher session in August, and speak. So that'll again get the message back out to the YPCs and those new staff. And we're going to continue to work with them. We're trying to develop that relationship from our end at the YPC end, and then at the school end. With the support workers as well. So we should be, building those bridges and building those relationships. But we're working with our YPCs to help engage that process at the regional CSAP level to ensure that it's happening, and communicating with those coordinators at those levels, that they have a relationship with the YPCs. They're familiar with the programs, what the expectations are. They've provided us the feedback on a lot of steps for how we can further engage students and communities. So we're going to continue to really put the work in to build those relationships.
Because we all know that some of these processes that are in place are not very inclusive for some of our population, right? And like that interview process, all those forms, like that might be just a block right away, and it's been in the past.
Yep.
Right. So I'm just kind of questioning, like it's a great vision, but I think that we really need to like focus on that communication piece and the understanding that everybody should be kind of like in the narrative should be the same for everyone, really.
100%.
Definitely, and that's something that we're realizing, that we can't just pay lip service to it, right? It has to be a process, and that's one of the things that we're going to work on. I mean, we're looking at where the disconnect exists in the system, what schools have been doing well and what we can learn from them, what schools have been struggling, and how we can help develop those relationships. Because again, some of them have been long-term relationships with communities where things have been fractured, and we have to rebuild bridges, right? So we're looking at how we can support everyone in the system to move forward, right? Because what's already happened in those schools that hasn't been as successful, we need to to move beyond that and focus on how we can improve things, right? Knowing that we don't want to repeat those mistakes, but we want to make sure that we're engaging those communities, and making them feel like this is a place that that they're valued and can be successful as well. And yeah, it's continuing to monitor and support and provide encouragement to everyone, and get feedback from said both the support workers and the coordinators at the regional CSAP level, because most of those coordinators have a really good system to receive communication from the communities, right? So we need to ensure that communities are aware of these programs and feel valued. And if there is a block, there are barriers that exist, how we can help remove those barriers, or make the process a lot smoother for everyone.
And I do have another quick question, is that the folder that was just shared by Kim, there's a lot of good information in that folder. Can we share that with our admin?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's all available for admin. And that's all of that information is available through the curriculum website, through the co-op Moodle. So yes, share away.
Yeah, it's easier to be just in one spot too for admin.
Yep.
So I'll put that in my first bi-weekly blast to my
for sure
staff.
Mm-hmm.